like the law of the contract, right? I don't know if we were going to expound on
Yeah,
the
let's
document.
define contract. Okay,
Okay.
the U.S. Constitution says there's no slavery in America, right?
Right.
There's no slavery in America. There's also no slavery in the United States
But there's
because,
voluntary servitude, right?
but there's voluntary
And
servitude. There's
that is in the
contractual.
is that in the 14th Amendment? I think it is, or it might be. It might not be. I'm not sure.
No, it doesn't mention voluntary servitude, but
But it,
you will see the word voluntary a lot when the IRS talks about seeking benefits, services, privileges from the United States.
okay.
None of them are forced on you. Like I said, even the most extreme one of going to the Vietnam War isn't even forced upon you. You had to contract into it.
Right. That's crazy. That's an amazing story, by the way. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
um, okay, so with a contract, as you're defining contracts, I don't know if you've gotten as far as to define that.
Well, a contract is an agreement. The scripture, even if you don't believe in the scriptures at all, they still apply to earth, people on earth, and even in heaven. So when God says you make a deal, you're supposed to honor it, unless it's a violation of God's law. And there's even some times when it's a violation of God's law, and God still says, "I do it anyway." But America Foundations of Law allows its people to contract as long as it doesn't violate God's law. It's a binding contract. So a contract is simply an agreement between parties. Now, the agreement is only valid if there's full disclosure and if it's conscionable. I can't do anything that's unconscionable. A jury of 12 people can step forward and say, "Hey, that was really unconscionable. We're not going to enforce that contract." Now, I can say it's unconscionable, and the jury might step forward and say, "No, you knew what you were doing. We're going to enforce it." So, contract is basically an agreement between people, and the Constitution is not allowed. Other people are not allowed, including the United States, to interfere with the right to contract.
Hmm.
Okay.
And so that goes when you say contract and it's an agreement, that goes for verbal and nonverbal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I came at this from like the music background, and at one point in time there was this guy who wanted to manage me, and he was trying to hold me under verbal contract that we had an agreement for something, and I just thought that was interesting to tie in with this. So
Sure. Sure. You still have to prove the contract, and a verbal contract is much harder to prove than a written one. But they're both binding in God's law. And if they're binding in God's law, they're supposed to be binding in all courts in the world.
hmm so I guess what I don't want to, we'll try to keep this, in segments here. What do you do to figure all this out? I guess. I mean, it's such a complex thing, but what do you do? Where's the recourse and remedy in all of this for someone like just your average person, like, or I guess I shouldn't say person, but people like Daniel and I who are dads, and we're finding out about this stuff, and we've just had our wives have just given birth to our children who all have birth certificates, and we're trying to think about the family, and we haven't vaccinated them, and we think about all these different things that the state tries to force on, and at some point they'll probably try to force vaccines too. So how do you relieve yourself, or how is there any sort of remedy or recourse for that?
The most important principle to remember is keep the burden of the proof of the contract and the proof of the application of the law territorially upon the moving party. So let's just talk about the birth certificate. Okay, the birth certificate is somebody step forward and says, "Hey, I want a benefit, I want a service," and they go, "Yeah, yeah, we offer it. Just fill out this birth certificate, and your child will be considered a ward of the state, in a sense."
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so see, there's a contract. You stepped forward, you moved in their direction, and now I believe that a jury of 12 is going to say that's unconscionable because you didn't know what you were getting into. You didn't know you were waiving the child's rights
Right. They
for
just stamped your
competency.
they just stamped your feet on there. So
Yeah, yeah. So there's a prime example of an unconscionable contract that a jury would probably agree with you. Say,
Okay.
hey, no way, we didn't agree to giving our children away. But there are people in society that are far better off with the United States being awarded the United States. They're far better off. Now the sad part is that when you don't want to be awarded the state, they have many ways of punishing you. They make it difficult for you to get a job. They make it difficult for you to get a bank account. They discredit you in every way. But as far as the birth certificate, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I can't remember which state, but it was in a southern state where I think it was the Mormons or somebody had about 250 children in a school, and they got allegations of child abuse. So the feds, either the feds or the sheriff, maybe probably together, they went down and they confiscated all the kids. And have you heard of that story? This
I have not.
happened
No. No.
probably 5 years ago or something.
Okay.
But anyway, they grabbed all 250 children, and I'm pretty sure it was a Mormon group. I consider it a non-Christian group, but they grabbed them and they contacted my friend up here, the same guy that raised his hand to go into the Vietnam War. Okay, he's a very sharp lawyer.
Okay.
He refused to get his attorney's license. He refused because when he came back home, he studied it up and he found out that it was a unholy alliance to get that license.
Right.
So anyway, he found out about it. And he called down there and he got a hold of some of the head people, and he said they did a document together that you're going to put an affidavit together by all the parents and say there's no Social Security number associated with these kids and no birth certificate associated with these kids. Almost none of those kids had a Social Security number or a birth certificate. And as soon as that hit the court, the next day they let them go.
Wow.
They let them go. They
Wow.
let them go. Nobody in America could figure out why those kids were let go all of a sudden. They just said, well, we decided to let them go. But we know because we put the document together, to put the burden of proof on the government to prove up evidence that they were actually a ward of the state and that they could come against them in that fashion. So there's a prime example. Now, if they were a ward of the state, then the state could put you through an ordeal. You could take them out of the ward of the state at any moment, I believe. I'm not for sure. At least you could take yourself out of the ward of the state. But anyway, they would, if they were a ward of the state, they would be the parents and everybody involved would be subject to the congressional and legislative laws. But if you're not a ward of the state, then you're subject to common law. And they knew that they would have a terrible time under common law because they couldn't hardly prove any actual damage.
Right. And on that note, can we talk a little bit about common law? Like, what is common law exactly? I mean, I know it's pre-code law. Or, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
I have a question for you real quick, Paul.
Yeah.
You said that your friend did not get his attorney license, correct?
That's correct.
And you never went to school for law, you just studied it yourself.
That's correct.
Okay. So could you explain for us and our listeners how you and your friend are able to operate in the court system? Because I believe a lot of people are under the impression, unless you're representing yourself, you have to have an attorney to represent you in a court of law or to act in the court system.
Or that's part of the bar association, correct?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, you're called
I
a legal
believe,
layman, correct?
ask that question again.
You're called a legal layman, right?
Well, I've never used that. I don't have to call myself anything. That's where
Right.
we want to keep the burden of proof on them.
Right. Okay.
What am I doing that's a regulatable activity? And they'll say, well, you're acting as an attorney. Then even the Supreme Court of Nebraska tried to come after me, and I don't even bother. I don't even bother to go to court. I just put an affidavit in there, and I say, please produce evidence that I did something that was within the jurisdiction of the United States. And I didn't change one period or change my answering machine title or nothing about being a lawyer. But anyway, the Constitution does apply to the American, right?
Right.
Until you get to the 14th Amendment. Okay, then it starts applying to different entities other than an additional entity. Okay, but we don't have to worry about that because we're gonna mainly talk about the position of the American. I don't
Okay.
like to call myself a national. I don't like to call myself. I used to call myself a free inhabitant pursuant to the Articles of Confederation. But why should I name myself that they choose to do within their jurisdiction? I don't think a free inhabitant's a problem, but I don't really want to associate with any of their written
Right.
documents.
Right.
Gotcha.
I just claim I put in. I'm putting together a document. It's called the Affidavit of Sovereignty, and you just file it with the court clerk, and you get a certified copy of it, so that you can prove that this thing was created at a certain date, and then you have copies of that, notary created copies of that, which are free. You can hand to anybody from the state that tries to treat you as a subject to the written laws.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Okay.
as long as you stay off their land. Now, of course, we know they try to get you for practicing law without a license. Okay?
Right.
Practicing law without a license is a statutory, it's a legislative law. It's written law. And it does apply. It is a valid law. It does apply. But where does it apply, and to whom does it apply to? The U.S. Constitution, when it talks about you have a right to counsel, okay, that's
Mhm.
referring to an American. A U.S. citizen does not have right to counsel. They don't have rights. They don't have any rights of the U.S. Constitution. Believe it or not, they don't have any rights. They only have privileges and benefits, no
Right.
rights. But the American still has those rights, and it says that you have a right to counsel. It doesn't say you have a right to an attorney. You don't have a right to somebody that's licensed by the state. Now, what they do is when you're in their court system, when you walk into a U.S. court system, you are presumed, sadly enough, you are presumed to be a U.S. citizen because you're walking into a U.S. court.
Right.
Okay.
Just the fact that you're walking into a U.S. court, they're assuming you're a U.S. citizen.
And by
And
walking into that court, is that where you're passing the bar, or are you just stepping into
no,
the courthouse?
no, you're just interacting with them.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not talking about territorial. I'm just talking about you're interacting with them. Because the
Okay.
first thing, if let's say somebody from Germany walked up to you and said, "You got to show up in court," and you would just look at them and you'd say, "Where in the world do you get your jurisdiction?" And that's what Americans should do with any actions of the U.S. courts. We should immediately put in a demur or a plea in abatement that challenges both territorial jurisdiction and personal jurisdiction. That's where your affidavit of sovereignty would come in. And you put the burden of proof on them to prove that you are subject to that court. Now, when I went in, after I started learning how to win, one of the main things I did to cause them to stop coming after me, because they were stinging me like every month, it was horrible, is I finally went in and I started challenging personal jurisdiction. And this is how it went. The court started, and I just told the judge that I'm challenging personal jurisdiction. And I told the judge, and I said, "Judge, now you have to turn to the plaintiff and have them produce evidence of personal jurisdiction over me." And the judge turned to the plaintiff, county prosecutor. She said, "What do you have to produce as evidence of personal jurisdiction over Mr. Hansen?" So the prosecutor puts me in the witness stand, and he asked me 20 questions, I think, pretty darn close to 20 questions, and they referred to everything under the sky that the state acts with. He asked me, did I have a birth certificate? Did I have a driver's license? Was I a citizen of the United States? Was I a citizen of the state of Nebraska? Did I reside in the city? Did I reside in the state? Did I reside in the United States? Did I have a Social Security number? I mean, he just touched every area that you could possibly think of. And to every question he asked me, I said, "Not that I'm aware of." And he literally started crying. He was so mad. He started crying.
Wow.
Not like a baby. He was just mad. His tears were coming out of his eyes. He was just turning red. And when he got done asking me those 20 questions, the judge just simply turned to him and said, "Mr. Prosecutor, you haven't produced any evidence of personal jurisdiction over Mr. Hansen."
Wow.
and the courtroom was just staring. The courtroom was full of people waiting for to go get ushered through, and they were just staring at me like, what is going on here?